Welcome, one and all, to this latest edition of the Future So Right podcast. This is a Green Flame Press production, and I'm your host, Pete Beal. Welcome back, one and all, for yet another edition of the podcast. I'm excited about this one. This is a fun topic. Well, okay, maybe it's not a fun topic, but I think it's a really important one for any aspiring author to be well informed on. So that's fun, right? I mean, being well informed is fun. Well, okay. So if you've read the title, you know by now we're talking about editing, and specifically we're talking about working with a professional editor. So we're going to be diving into that at length tonight, or today, or whenever you're listening to this. No matter who you are, where you are, when you're listening, I hope you're doing well. It's been an interesting couple of weeks for me, but we're not going to dive into that right now. A lot of good things going on, though. My debut novel is releasing on September 28th. Don't worry, I'm not going to launch into an ad on that. If you are interested, link in the description below. We're not here to talk about me, though. We're here to talk about editing, and specifically working with a professional editor. This is so important, isn't it, to the writing process and, well, particularly to the publishing process. You don't want to put out an incomplete work or a work that's substandard. And this is where a professional editor comes in. So we're going to touch on a few different topics today. We're going to touch on the different types of editing. We're just going to sort of gloss over those a little bit. I've talked about them in quite a few previous episodes, but we will touch a little bit on the various types of editing and what they entail. We'll talk a little bit about how you find an editor. Where do you go? What are you looking for? I think this is important. Choosing the right editor for your project is so crucial. And then we'll just dive into a little bit of a discussion about what it's actually like having your work professionally edited. You know, this work you've invested so much of your time and, yourself into. You're handing over your hard-earned money to have someone critique it. Fun, right? Actually, it's not so bad. So, take a seat, get comfortable, grab yourself a cool or warm beverage, whichever you prefer, and enjoy the podcast. Thank you. So let's start with a quick discussion on who exactly needs to work with a professional editor. And the truth is that pretty much anybody can benefit from this. If you're planning on going a traditional publishing route through a publishing house, this isn't going to be optional for you. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to work with their editors to really refine your story, get it cleaned up, get your grammar cleaned up, everything exactly as they want it. If you're self-publishing, you can technically circumvent this step if you would like, but this is still not something I necessarily recommend for really anybody. To me, the only writer who really probably doesn't need an editor is one who doesn't plan on selling their work. They're just doing it for their own enjoyment. If you plan on selling somebody your work, I think you owe it to that person to produce a professional product, and employing a professional editor is going to go a long way toward making this happen. You don't want to put a book out with a lot of typos, spelling errors, poor sentence structure. What are some other common things? For example, quickly shifting points of view. These are things that an editor can find and clean up for you. So really, anyone who wants to do this professionally is going to have to work with an editor at some point if they truly want to put out the best product possible. So, with that being said, let's dive a little bit into sort of three of the major types of editing that are out there. So we're going to talk a little bit about the definitions of them, what they entail, and which type of editing might be right for which writers. Alright, so we're going to start with the type of editing that typically comes first if you're going to go all out and get all three of these types of edits done on your manuscript. So we're going to start with developmental editing. Now, the name sort of implies what it is without even having to sit here and define it at length. But since I love the sound of my own voice, let's do it anyway. So, developmental editing is mainly story focused. You're looking for things during a developmental edit such as plot holes, story structure, character development. Overall, we're just looking to see if your story makes sense, if it's solid, if it's cohesive, if it flows well. This isn't so much what most people think of when they think of editing, which is diving into things like typos and grammar and spelling. That comes in our second editing, which we're going to get to in a minute or two. So a developmental edit, rather than focusing on those small details in the words themselves, it's more of a big picture, is really the best way that I can think of putting this. Pacing is a good thing that's really looked at in a developmental editing. Does your story move at a consistent pace, or does it have long stretches where nothing happens repeatedly and then everything exciting happens in a few pages and now we're back to another 100 pages of very slow pace? Does your setting make sense? Does the world this story takes place in work for the type of story? Thematically, is your story all over the place in the message it's trying to convey? Are your characters inconsistent in their actions? These are the type of things a developmental editor is looking for. So again, it's really important, if you're going to go with multiple edits, to do the developmental edit first. Now, why is that so important? Well, think about it. If you're self-publishing, you're paying for all of these, right? So let's say you hire a copy editor, which we're going to get into here very shortly, and you pay them a not small amount of money to go in and fix your grammar, fix your sentences, get your spelling all up to scratch. And then you send your work to a developmental editor who points out a lot of plot holes and pacing concerns and issues with your characters that you now have to go through and rewrite significant portions of your book. Well, what's wrong here? Well, you're going to have to go back and pay a copy editor again to fix up the parts that you just had to rewrite. So I would highly recommend, if you're going to employ multiple forms of edits, to follow the order that I'm listing in this podcast. It's going to save yourself a lot of time, a lot of headaches, and a lot of money. So developmental edit comes first. This is the big picture edit. So as we hinted a moment ago, the next form of editing that we're going to be talking about is copy editing. So what is copy editing? Well, copy editing, I think, is what most people think about when they think about editing. This is more, if the developmental edit is larger in scope, this is more microscopic, if that makes sense. So for example, a copy editor is going to be looking at things like grammar, spelling, typos, sentence structure. For example, if your sentences are feeling repetitive, if you're structuring all of your sentences the same way, this could be something that an editor is going to help you correct. Dialogue. Getting into those nitty-gritties of your dialogue. Does it sound right? Is it awkward? These are things that a copy editor can point out to you. One thing that my copy editor pointed out to me, for example, there were a few words that I had a tendency to overuse. One of them was actually, strangely enough, unadorned in my first book. So she was able to cut back on those for me, and it was really an invaluable thing. These are things that we don't really notice while we're writing the book, and when we're doing our own edits, our own second and third and fourth drafts, we're so close to the story that we might not necessarily realize all the time that we're making these types of mistakes. So to me, copy editing is almost always going to be a mandatory thing that you really want to have done to your book, because let's be honest, these are the types of mistakes that any reader is going to spot from a mile away when they open your book, right? So The copy editor's job is to get that manuscript as clean as it possibly can be so that, hopefully a reader picks up your book in a store, opens it up. They're not immediately seeing typos or weirdly structured sentences. They're going to pick it up and hopefully see a professional looking product. Okay, so we're moving on to the final editing step, and that's proofreading. Now, proofreading ideally will be done once you've completed your developmental edits, your copy edits, and essentially once your book is pretty much ready for release. And the goal is pretty straightforward. It's meant to be sort of a final safety net that'll sweep up any mistakes that are still there. If there's typos that have managed to make it through all your rounds of edits and your editor's rounds of edits, or maybe there are new typos that have come in after you've reworked your manuscript according to your editor's critiques, that's what this is for. Ideally, you'll have pretty much a completed printed copy of your book that you can give your proofreader so that they can basically check everything. Is it set up correctly for print? No typos, like we said, no sort of spelling errors or blatant gaffes that manage to slip through all the rounds before now. So now that we have sort of a basic understanding of what the three different types of editing are, let's discuss a little bit about who might need each type of editing. I'm going to just sort of come out and say this right out of the gate. I think that every single author could benefit from having your book professionally copy edited. I did it. I have no regrets whatsoever. And I highly doubt you will have any regrets either. Whether your book's fiction or nonfiction, fantasy, romance, we're all human. We're all going to be making these errors, some of which we're going to smack ourselves in the head and think we're an idiot when the editor ends up pointing them out to us later on. You don't want those to go into publication. Now, developmental editing is a little bit trickier because this might not necessarily be needed for everyone. If you're writing a nonfiction book, for example, it may not be as important. Obviously, this could depend a little bit on the topic of your book. On the other hand, if you're writing fiction and you're also a person who doesn't do a lot of outlining of your work, I would say a developmental edit is almost mandatory at that point. Because when you're not doing an outline, you don't have that basic story structure set up from the beginning where you're working towards an end goal. And I find that when you're flying by the seat of your pants, so to speak, you're going to end up with loose plot lines, characters that maybe aren't developing consistently, and errors like that. So I think a developmental edit for a writer of that sort could be extremely beneficial. Now, proofreading comes to mind as something that, again, I think almost any author could very well benefit from. I think, unlike copy editing, it is possible to do this yourself. However, you also need to accept the fact that if you do this yourself, there's probably going to be at least one or two things that you end up missing. So, is that something you're comfortable with? Do you have the funds available? And is it worth it to you to incur this extra cost in the name of avoiding one or two potential mistakes making it through? You have to be honest with yourself about how thorough you're going to be able to be doing this yourself. If you don't think that you're going to have the focus to get this right, I think it's definitely worth saving up the money, having a professional do it for you. Overall, I think the moral of the story is that pretty much any type of editing can benefit pretty much any type of author. The big questions you have to ask yourself are, what do I have available as far as funds? What are my particular project's potential areas of weakness? And where would it potentially benefit the most from having a professional review it? I mean, if you have the financial resources to get all three of these professionally done, and you're not going to bat an eye at it, it might be the best idea for you. If you have to pick only two or pick only one, that's ultimately going to be your decision. In the end, I ended up going with one option, which was copy editing. That's just what my financial situation allowed me to do. Fortunately, as an outliner, I feel like the developmental edit wouldn't have benefited me quite as much as it might some other authors, and fortunately, with my incredibly anal attention to detail, I feel I was able to do a pretty thorough proofread of my book as well. Copy editing, looking at my editor's notes, I know beyond any doubt I could never have done that myself. So, it's all going to come down to you, your strengths, your weaknesses, your manuscript strengths and weaknesses, and what's right for you. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about the different types of editing and who could potentially benefit from each type, but what about the process of actually finding and hiring an editor? What are some things you need to know to do this? Now, obviously, we live in an internet age. You know how to go out and Google, find a book editor just fine on your own without me telling you that. But what are some things you need to watch out for when it comes to hiring an editor? What are some good things to look for? And what are some possible warning signs to look for? In addition, what are some things you need to know before you start this process? To start, I would recommend knowing what type of editing you're in the market for. We just covered the developmental editing, the copy editing, the proofreading. Which one of these are you looking for? This is going to help you narrow down the selection of editors that are available to you. Another important thing to know is the word count of your manuscript. Almost every editor is going to base their charges on the word count of your manuscript. I'm not going to dive too much into the cost of editing because I covered that in my recent episode about the costs of publishing. It's a part of this publishing series I'm doing. You can check that out if you're curious. One other thing you might need to keep in mind is your own time frame. If you have a book where you're really hoping to release it in a short amount of time, where you might need an expedited edit done, keep in mind this is probably going to cost a little bit more, and you might have to do a little bit more hunting to find an editor with the availability to do that for you on short notice. So, what are some things to look for when hiring an editor? So let's assume you've gone out. I'm going to do it here. We're going to Google together. We're looking for an editor. Finding a book editor. Or even better, let's do this. Book editor for hire. Let's see what we come up with. Now, I can tell you right now that you're going to get a lot of different results. You're going to get some sort of consolidation services, places like Readsy and Fiverr, which I discussed in my episode on the cost of self-publishing. You're also going to have some individual websites out here. The top one that comes up for me is an individual editor. Looks like they purchased ad space on Google to be at the top. And as you go down the list, you're going to run into all sorts of websites. You're going to find blogs about what you're looking for, how to hire an editor. Look, a lot of these might be useful for you, so certainly check them out. Just be aware if you're reading an advice column, be aware of who's writing it and are they trying to sell you something. So let's talk about a few things, good and bad, to look out for when you're going through this process. And we're going to start with the bad things. Things that might be a bit of a red flag that might make you want to say, well, this might not be the editor for me. Red flag number 1. Do they say that they edit every single type of book? Fiction, nonfiction, every genre imaginable. Most editors are going to have a small number of genres and categories that they're going to feel comfortable editing in. Now, if it's a company that has multiple editors on staff, they might have different staff members assigned to different genres, so this could be fine, but these are questions you need to ask. What are these editors' histories? Have they edited this type of book before? Especially if you're writing some sort of specialized nonfiction book, You need somebody that knows what they're doing for you. So let's assume you found an editor that covers your genre and they're advertising pricing that you feel you can afford. What are some other things, or warning signs rather, that you can look for? Number one in my book, take a good close look at their web presence. For starters, if this editor has a website, you need to examine this carefully. Now, here's the thing. Errors happen on the internet. It's very rare to find a website that has perfect grammar and spelling and all of this on the internet. But one place where I would really not want to see these types of things is on the website of somebody claiming to be a professional editor. If they weren't willing to put in the attention to detail for their professional presence, how much attention to detail are they going to invest in your project? So that's one thing to look out for. Another thing is a portfolio, or rather an absence of a portfolio. If somebody has been a professional editor for any length of time, they've likely worked on quite a few projects, right? So are they listing these on their website? I would think they should have at least a handful of books out there that they've edited. So to me, editing is a significant financial investment. You want to make sure you're hiring the right person. What could potentially be a good research investment, if they're advertising a book on their website, go out and buy that book if it's affordable for you. Read it, see if you enjoy it, great if it's your cup of tea, but more so look for frequent errors in the book while you're reading it. Is there anything really obvious where you say to yourself, I can't believe an editor would miss this? If so, that might not be the right editor for you. Even bigger red flag is if they have nothing out there at all explaining what they've done. That's a huge red flag to me. If they have certain authors that maybe they've worked with multiple times based on their website, maybe try reaching out to those authors via social media. Almost every author has a social media platform now. And ask them what the experience was like. You may not get a response, but I find most authors want to help others. They want to help other authors succeed, so if they have good things to say about their editor, they're going to jump to share that with you. If they had a bad experience, they're probably going to let you know that, and who knows, it's possible the editor never even worked with that author at all and they're just making it up, and the author can let you know that you're potentially dealing with a fraudulent person there. So what are some good things to look out for? We've talked a little bit about some negative things. What are some good things that you could potentially look forward? For my editor, the thing that really ended up selling me on her was the fact that she offered a free sample edit. So to me, this was the perfect way to make sure she was the right fit for my project. What she did was I hired her for a copy edit, and she basically edited my first chapter for free as a way of showing me how she would handle my project, give me an idea for what working with her would be like. I was able to review that and see, okay, this is great. This is a good fit for me. If somebody's offering a free sample edit, that's a great thing to jump on. Maybe they'll offer to edit your first chapter or your first 5 pages or something like that. That's really, in my opinion, the best possible way that you could determine if an editor is right for you, is seeing firsthand how they handle your particular work. Because someone could potentially be a very good editor and just not a good fit for you in your particular book. So if they're willing to put themselves out there for free or for a very nominal fee, I'd say that's definitely a worthwhile investment of your time or very small funds. Another thing to look out for when hiring an editor that could be a good thing, it's similar to what we talked about when looking at the negatives. Take a look at their portfolio, see who the authors they're working with are, see what the books are. check the reviews on those books. Are they well reviewed? Are the reviews talking about things like errors in the writing, in the prose? Well, that could be a red flag. Likewise, if they're talking about how clean the book is, it's potentially a very good sign. Check the social media platforms of those authors. Are they shouting out their editor? I mean, it's not something that most authors do every single day, but if you scroll through a little bit, especially maybe around the time of a release, authors will often acknowledge the people who made large contributions to their projects. People like their cover artist or their editor. See if they had nice things to say on their social media platform about their editors. Look at the editor's presence on social media. Are any of these authors interacting with them, saying good things about the things they post? It could be a red flag if there are authors they've worked with out there criticizing them on social media. That could potentially be a big red flag for you, right? There was one thing that sort of just popped into my head in terms of things to look out for. And I'll just touch on it real quick. Be wary of an editor that's promising you too much. Is there an editor that's saying they will do a full edit on your book? And by that I mean they'll developmentally edit and copy edit and proofread it. Be wary of this. In my opinion, and it's also the opinion of my editor, these are really tasks where it's probably best to hire an individual editor for each of these, and I'll explain why. Especially the copy edit and the proofread should probably be done by separate people. And it's for the same reason that you have to be wary about proofreading your own work, and simply put, you're too close to it. And the same thing could potentially be said for an editor after they've spent hours upon hours copy editing your work. They might not be as likely to find their own mistakes on a proofread. Not really through fault of their own, but that's just human nature. Once we've spent a lot of time with something, we don't want to find the fault in it. So that's just something to watch out for. I've seen a lot of websites out there and a lot of people. I talked about this a little bit in my episode on pricing when I was reviewing Fiverr. People that would advertise that basically they'll do everything for you. They'll give you the whole world in terms of editing. Just approach this with extreme caution, because I'm not saying they can't possibly give you a good end result, but there's a reason that these are each highly specialized areas. An editor could potentially do more than one of them. That's no question about that. But doing more than one of them on the same book can certainly get dicey, in my opinion. So now that we've covered what the different types of editing are, and a little bit about how to go about the process of finding the right editor for you, why don't we dive into the nitty-gritty about what working with a professional editor is actually like. And I think this is the part that anyone who's maybe in the process of working on their first book might be a little bit intimidated about. To be honest, I was too. It's an interesting idea. You know, I'm going to pay somebody to point out what's wrong with my hard work. But in the end, it's a positive thing for you and your book. So what's it actually like? This is going to vary a little bit based on who your editor is. And one thing that I would really stress the importance of is making sure you're very informed on exactly what it is you're purchasing before you do so you know what to expect going in. For example, my editor and I communicate pretty much exclusively via email, and this works out great for me. If you're someone who wants phone conversations or Zoom meetings, that probably wouldn't work very well for you if you need that face-to-face or voice-to-voice contact. But there are editors who offer these services. You just need to make sure you're examining the websites closely and make sure you're clarifying with the editor while you hire them what exactly it is you're getting in exchange for your money. So the first thing you're going to need to do when you establish a relationship with the editor you're going to work with is you need to set a date when your edit essentially is going to start. You need to make a booking. Editors tend to be quite busy, so they'll need to find a spot in their calendar where they can fit you in, and you'll need to make sure that works for your schedule. Now, typically, most editors are going to charge you half of the price of the edit at the time of booking, and then the other half upon completion of the edit. So that's something to plan and prepare for in advance before you reach out to an editor to start booking. Once you've examined their pricing, it's a good idea to make sure you have about half of the estimated cost ready to go based on the word count of your manuscript. So you'll make your booking, submit your deposit, and your editor will put you on their calendar and be planning on editing your work. Now, what I typically do with my editor is send her the manuscript a few days before the start date once I've made all of the final revisions that I want to make. This usually results in a few changes to the word count that I originally submitted to her, but that's not really an issue. She just adjusts the price for the second payment based on the changes in the word count. I think most editors will probably be fine with this as well. So I send her the manuscript and she sends me a contract which I have to sign, and then, well, she does her work and I wait. She does tell me upon receipt of the manuscript a finish date once she's had a chance to review the total word count and get an idea of what sort of work she's in for. And so then I know exactly when to expect it back. And I wait. Well, I don't just wait. I work on my other projects, but in the back of my head, it's always there. I wonder what's going on, and I hope that it doesn't come back to me just a huge wall of red text. I think that's one of every author's fears, is getting your manuscript back from an editor and it's just nothing but red, right? But that hasn't been the case for me. And in all likelihood, it's not going to be the case for you either. So for my first book, I employed a professional copy editor. And what was included in this, I should say? Well, included, in addition to the copy editing, was a reader report, where the editor pretty much broke down sort of things that were changed consistently throughout the story, things that she noticed, and also just generally what she thought of the book. Also included, sorry, I'm actually looking right now, she included 2 copies of my manuscript. One which was considered the clean copy with all of the changes already made, and another copy which tracked the changes as she made them. So let's take a look at this and see what that was like for me. This will be fun. I haven't actually looked at this document for a while. So the copy that tracks her changes, essentially what she does is she highlights the areas where she made corrections in red, and sometimes would leave certain notes on the side if she felt it required explanation. If it was something simple like you misspelled this or you punctuated this wrong, typically no note was needed. And for the more extensive edits, there were, simply put, little comments. And all the comments are not always necessarily negative. Sometimes she'd highlight something and say, hey, I really like the way you worded this sentence. So some example of some comments. I had a sentence here where I got a little bit too wordy. So she simply wrote, I simplified your word choice here. If you can use fewer words and still get your point across, then I'd recommend cutting all the excess you can. And very much agreed. So we got, what are some good ones? Oh, when I described one character as having sandy brown hair, she explained that she'd hyphenated the color before the noun so that we know we're describing the color and not the fact that he has We weren't saying that he has sand in his hair. Left a note where she'd removed a certain piece of a sentence because, like many first-time writers do, I was a little too explanatory with how one of the characters was feeling. I had actually done a good job of conveying it in the sentence prior, but then I felt the need to go on and explain how he was feeling, even though I had shown. So what I had done was I had shown and told. And they always say show, don't tell, but don't show and tell. Yeah, this is fun. I'm not going to lie, going through this and reading some of these notes again, and also looking at my writing and seeing the things that I've learned in the years since I originally wrote this story, all the books that I've written since this. And it's funny, I look at these notes and I see I've taken lessons from these, and I've used them when writing books that have come since and editing books that came after this one. So it's not something that only helps you for one book. You're going to learn lessons from this experience that you're going to carry with you into the future. All right, so that's fun, but we're going to get back to the nitty-gritty. In addition, she also included a style sheet, which is essentially a sheet that she used for her reference while editing the book to help her keep track of, say, characters and places and things like that. Definitely handy to have. Good to see that. So, I've only worked with one professional editor, so I can't speak for every professional editor. But this is what I'll say. It's an intimidating experience, especially the first time around. But you have to understand, their job isn't to make you feel bad about your work. Their job is to help you improve your work. And most of the people that I've met in the writing community, this goes for authors and editors and pretty much everyone else, is extremely kind, extremely friendly, and they want to help. So I think a fear that a lot of authors have is, well, like I sort of mentioned it earlier, you're going to get your manuscript back and it's going to be a big wall of red, and it's going to be full of these rude comments telling you you're an idiot for, why didn't you punctuate this right? But that's not what it's like. Not from my experience. And I don't think there are many editors out there like this, because if you think about it, they're not going to stay in business doing that, right? Who's going to hire them if, they're just going to send your manuscript back insulting you and running you down? The editor's job is to help improve your manuscript and to help you develop as a writer. And it's an incredibly valuable thing. And I think that any writer is going to benefit from any type of editing. I strongly recommend copy editing for just about any manuscript. Looking at this, like I said, I haven't looked at this document in quite some time where I got my changes back, but looking through it now, there are so many just small things, and these small things add up. And these are things that, any one of these isn't going to be a big deal, but if I had these in my book, I just got my first physical paper copy of my book, I would not be very proud of it. And as I said before, and I'm just going to emphasize it again, I honestly feel this has made me a better writer. It's been a truly rewarding experience. It's been worth every penny that I've paid to have my books professionally edited, and I think that anyone that goes through the process is going to agree with me on that, as long as they're taking the time to make sure they're hiring reputable professionals that know what they're doing and can add value to their project. I think we're coming to a pretty good point to end this podcast. I hope that you've taken something of value away from it in terms of working with an editor, or the process of hiring an editor, or just learning a little bit more about the various different types of editing. A reminder, I did discuss the financial costs in my episode on the costs of publishing. If you enjoyed the content today, please hit that thumbs up button. I appreciate every single time somebody does that. It's a huge help. And feel free to hit the subscribe button as well if you want to be notified whenever I release episodes. I try to get them out every 2 weeks. I would like to announce a little bit of a change to the coming schedule. My original plan had been to release an episode on marketing and promotion in 2 weeks, but I think we're going to bump that back 2 weeks. To put it simply, I'm still in the process of releasing this first book and still in the process of marketing it. So I want to make sure I'm giving you the most complete information possible in that episode. So we're going to wait an extra 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks instead, I think I'm probably going to bump up my episode on common mistakes that first-time authors make. So make sure you stay tuned for that, and hopefully we can prevent you from making 1 or 2 of them. If you have any questions, comments, feedback for the show, all of those are welcome. You can find my website linked down below, petebeal.com, where you can reach me. I'm happy to read your questions or comments on the show if you would like, and happy to leave you anonymous if that is your desire. Also going to be looking for guests for the podcast coming up in the next few months. If you would like to be a guest, if you're an author, editor, cover artist, and you would like to join me and have a discussion, you can also do that at my website, petebeal.com. There's a form to fill out, and I will get back to you ASAP. My debut fantasy novel, The Path of the Rawwielder, is on pre-sale now, publishing September 28th of 2021. You can find links down below for a few places where you can purchase it if you are interested, and I would appreciate every single sale. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Until next time, everybody, please stay safe, stay healthy, stay creative, and always keep writing. Thank you so much for listening.